worked out with state employees, saving jobs, saving dollars. And from the very beginning, the governor said it's going to be savings, state employee savings, which includes concessions. This is a mix of concessions, givebacks, and savings.
But Diane, listen to this. The speaker just said if Pratt & Whitney announced laying off 4,000 jobs, we would run in to try to save it. And I agree with him. Last month, Connecticut lost 6,000 jobs. 6,000 people were laid off, and we did nothing. What did we do? We raised taxes $3.7 billion over 2 years. Those people who just got laid off have to pay 6.35% more on their clothing for their kids. They have to pay 6.35% more for over-the-counter non-prescription medication. They lose 40% of their property tax credit. I mean, the idea that the 50,000 people who work for the state that number cannot be downsized to help our economy move forward when 6,000 jobs were just lost last month alone in the private sector makes no sense. We have over 3 million people in the state of Connecticut, including state employees who do a very good job. This is not about demonizing them. This is about getting our economy moving again. And many of us believe that our government right now is too big and too inefficient. And if we can find efficiencies over the next 4 years, we won't be able to implement them if you can't eliminate positions. That's the reality of it.
You also were not happy, I heard comments you made on a radio show the other day, with what happened with the pension structuring in this new deal, which, as we should say, has not been ratified yet, but still has been agreed to. You felt that there wasn't significant restructuring.
Well, look, you can still include your overtime and your mileage reimbursements into your base pay for purposes of pension. I think that's a mistake. There are other pension reform changes that are going around in many of our towns and cities across Connecticut, in other states that we failed to look at. Taking a look at least having a committee to look at a defined contribution plan versus a defined benefit plan is something that other places are doing, and we missed an opportunity there. And we can't open that contract up again until 2022.
You know, it's funny. I mean, it's this kind of mantra, you know, coming from, I would say, the Republican Party, which says, let's lay off workers. It's good for our economy. Let's take away pensions. We should be talking about having secure pensions for everybody, union or non-union. I mean, the average state employee pension is about $20-some thousand. I was at an event in Fairfield County, and one of my colleagues said, "It's so great. You could live on 10% of their pensions. You'd be happy." Well, that'd be $2,000. I don't think people want a pension of $2,000. So that's an exaggeration. You know, these state employees, they put in their time. They sock the dollars away. They contribute towards the pension, or they don't contribute towards the pension, but the state sets aside a very small amount. You know, the big news is about some doctor who's working and performing surgeries, and guess what? He's collecting his pension, but he's also doing work. Well, maybe that's the exception. But the average Joe or Mary, they retire on $20-some thousand, not a whole lot. But we need to, make sure the public, the general public, we need to be doing more here, just saying, let's figure out ways that we can ensure when people retire, no matter where they work, they have a decent pension or some kind of savings. Because how many people in 2009 had 401ks that they were ready to retire, and they fell right through the floor, and they had nothing. Mm-hmm. They had nothing. It kind of reminds me of my parents during the Depression. You know, their fathers had saved something, and they lost everything. Well, we had that in here in Connecticut. We had people who were ready to retire. They had their homes paid off, and guess what? They lost everything. So we have to protect that. We have to protect the abuse on Wall Street. And we may just say to the public throughout, we want to create jobs, we want to save jobs, we want to figure out what we can do to help you here at the General Assembly. We want to protect your pensions if we can, and figure out ways that you can save and have a good life. That's what it's all about. Let's raise the level for the middle class. Let's take care of the middle class, not just threaten them with layoffs and say, we're going to take your pension away, we're going to take your health care away. Let's help out the middle class. That's what we're trying to do.
First of all, I mean, that is rhetoric beyond rhetoric. The governor talked about laying off 4,700 state employees. In the Republican budget, we had about 2,700 employees who would be laid off because of downsizing of government.
Plus the 4,000 if you didn't get the $2 billion.
No, we never put that number in there, Chris.
Well,
we talked about 5% of the workforce. But let's talk about the hypocrisy. 6,000 people lost their jobs last month in Connecticut alone, and the speaker didn't have a press conference decrying the loss of jobs in the private sector. Okay, that's what's going on here, Chris. Unemployment is 9.1% in the state of Connecticut. The private sector economy runs our economy in Connecticut, in the country, whether you like it or not, and the private sector is getting hammered.
Let me move on to another topic, and that is if we agree that the governor's union package is short of the $2 billion that he was talking about. Whether it's 1.6 or whatever you want to think it is, it's still short of the $2 billion that was discussed earlier in the session. So there's still somewhere in there a big gap to be made up, maybe as much as $400 million, maybe even more. Where's that going to come from, Senator?
Well, the governor has said he's not going to raise taxes any more than he has. The governor has said that any cuts in spending obviously cannot involve personnel. So it's going to have to come from programmatic spending cuts. I believe we're going to assume the governor's number unless OFA scores it differently. So it would be $300 million in the first year, $100 million in the second year. If you make those cuts in the first year of 300, you'll get your 100 in the second year. So I think the real number is $300 million in the first year. There also is over $400 million surplus built into the first year of the budget. Many of us were critical of building up such a large surplus while you were raising taxes, but I think that is an easy target to use to make up for the shortfall in the concession package. So I imagine it'll be a mix of some programmatic spending cuts and use of those surplus dollars.
Speaker, where would the money come from? Towns and cities, of course, are worried that it could come from municipal aid. And is there really a surplus built into the budget?
Well, there's a couple surpluses. I mean, the last few years we passed some budgets during some very, very tough times. We did things we didn't necessarily want to do, but we had to do in order to have a balanced budget. So we did some borrowing. And actually, this fiscal year, the numbers are better than anticipated. So there's a very good likelihood that we'll be actually able to avoid following through on some of that borrowing and actually end this year in the black for this fiscal year without doing any borrowing. So that's good. There is surplus projected for the next 2 years. I think combined about $1 billion. Now the $400 million, the governor's stated that his staff person, Ben Barnes, again, will give us a proposal. The budget bill we passed, we put a provision there that said the governor has to find $2 billion, and should he not, he has to come back with a plan
by May 31st,
which is next week.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get something before that. We'll have an idea where he's going, and we're going to discuss it like we do with the budgets, figure out how we solve this year's budget.
There had been some discussion over whether the governor could actually have the authority to make cuts himself. I understand that's not going to happen now. It's going to come back to the legislature.
Yes, it comes back to us.
Okay. Let's talk about something else that we showed some video on earlier in this program, and that was a rather heated debate in Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee yesterday over the governor's proposal that he announced just a little earlier about a roughly $900 million remaking of the UConn Medical Center. Now, some members seem to feel that this was being rushed, that they hadn't really had a chance to review a project this big, and that the governor was not following customary procedures. What do you say to that?
Well, I guess the first thing is we feel very proud of the UConn Medical Center, and we see it up on the hill as you drive through. It's a college, it's a hospital, it provides care for people. But financially, it's been in trouble for a number of years. We've had to bail it out, added extra more money because of the job they do, and they need help. And previous governors have addressed it. Governor Rell had a proposal to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in bond money. She actually set the money aside. We thought we could get some federal dollars to help out. Looks like now that's not going to happen. So what do we do? Do we just let it fall apart? Decay, lose our medical hospital? I've heard from some doctors who work there. They feel very frustrated. They're not doing what could be done. That we are doing some promising things such as stem cell research, etc., that is doing there. So, working there. So, the governor's plan is that basically right now, it's a plan right now. And he says, let's figure out a way that we can boost the hospital, we can enhance the research that we're doing there, and really become a first-rate research institution that we can work on patents and we can do these things. We can work in conjunction with Yale, etc., and make that. Let's revamp the medical school. Let's put more emphasis on primary care. There's going to be a shortage of primary care doctors. Let's figure out a way to do that. Let's figure out a way to bring some private enterprise in there and help us fund what we're doing through office space and hospital space, etc. So, and let's create some jobs along the way. So it's research, it's education, it's jobs, and it's healthcare. That's a pretty good idea for a package. Now, have we seen the details? We have not. But we still have 2 weeks or so to go. We've worked on, I know with Governor Rell, she moved real quick when she had a plan to do that as well. So we will have time to look at the governor's proposal. We'll have time to study it, be deliberate with it, and see if it makes sense. So I think the idea of jobs, research, health care, is a good one. Let's not step on it before it's out of the box, and let's see what it is. And if it works, let's see if we can do it.
Senator, I've heard you say that you would be in favor of enhancing the research capacities because that might actually boost jobs in the biosciences field and biotechnology, but that you have real questions about whether money ought to be spent on the physical plant itself.
I do, and I opposed the proposal that was put together between Governor Rell and the University of Connecticut for the very reason that the hundreds of millions of dollars into the physical plant of the hospital, in my opinion, is not necessary. Investing hundreds of millions of dollars to make UConn a top research university, I think, is important. The incubator space, the partnerships with Yale and other research, boosting bioscience and biotechnology in Connecticut are all good, and I'm very supportive of those ideas. But the University of Connecticut has a philosophy that they have to own their own hospital, and you have to have sort of an integrated campus for this to work. Harvard Medical School is the best medical school in the world, and they don't own their own hospital because they have partnerships with area hospitals.
You know, the people at Yale would argue with you about what's the best medical school in the world, right?
Okay, one of the best. That's all right. There's a small school in Worcester, Mass. They don't have their own hospital. They got almost $300 million in research grants last year. UConn got about $39 million. So I don't think you have to own your own hospital because you risk, look, our hospitals in this state are in big trouble. Hartford Hospital, St. Francis, New Britain, Children's Medical Center. We have some wonderful hospitals who are struggling financially. I'm concerned about the state competing with them and making their financial condition worse. I would love to have UConn do partnerships with Hartford Hospital, St. Francis, New Britain, and all of the area hospitals so they can do their clinical and research work combined. That's always been my concern, is that the ability of the state to come in, spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a physical plant which competes with the rest of the economy instead of the University of Connecticut as a research institution partnering with the rest of those hospitals. I would like to see more partnerships.
Well, I'm hearing that we have to wrap, but Mr. Donovan, earlier this week at the big Democratic fundraiser known as the JJB dinner, some stickers were handed out that said Donovan for Congress. Would you like to make it more formal here and announce your candidacy for the congressional seat? No, not
yet. I'm working on trying to get through the session right now. Probably after session, I'll probably make an announcement. But right now, we have to work on the budget. I'm pushing opening up healthcare access to people through the sustenance and healthcare pool, which is kind of like the general plan is to have kind of what we used to call the nonprofit Blue Cross, we all were familiar with, which actually a lot of us were quite happy with and changes. So we're looking at things like that. So let's get the business of the state done, and then we'll talk about politics.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us. I hope you'll join us again before the session ends so that we can see how we're doing. It's been very nice having you both here, Senator John McKinney and House Speaker Chris Donovan. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we just want to talk a little bit more about what else is going on at the Capitol today and give you a look at what CTN is covering. So here's what we have live on CTN. 10 o'clock, the Executive and Legislative Nominations Committee public hearing and meeting following it will air on TV and on our web stream. At 1 p.m., we will air the Senate session on CTN's web stream and on television. For more information on our schedule, go to our website, www.ct-n.com. And now a look at some of the other things that are happening at the Capitol today.